Hey guys, Jake Carlson here, host of the Modern Leadership Podcast. Are you ready to focus on amplifying your leadership superpowers? Let's go! Hello, fellow achievers, and welcome back to another exciting episode of the Modern Leadership Podcast. It is awesome to be with you again this week, as it is every week. This episode, I am joined by an amazing achiever, and I think you're going to love this interview. By way of introduction, let me throw out some impressive stats for you. 3, 35, 40, 5,000, and 7,000. Nice, right? Oh wait, what do they mean? Our guest today is Carl Gould. Carl started 3 multi-million-dollar companies by the age of 40. He wrote 3 best-selling books on business strategy and growth, mentored the launch of 5,000 companies, and certified over 7,000 coaches in 35 countries. He is the co-host of Quit and Get Rich, which is on iHeart, and today he is our modern leader. Carl, it is so great to have you with us. How are you today?
Oh, great. Thanks so much, Jake. Thanks for having me on. And that's such a nice intro. I appreciate it.
Well, it's an incredible intro. I mean, these are some impressive stats, and I want to dive into them just a little bit because 3 multi-million-dollar companies by age 40. I want to take you back and kind of get your mindset of how you got into business, what kind of businesses you started, and what really made them tick. So let's back up. How'd you get into business?
Well, I a little bit by accident, I think. It probably would have gotten there either way, but I think what accelerated the whole idea was I broke my leg pretty badly in my second year of college when I was studying accounting and finance, and so after 3 months at home and another 3 months learning how to walk and use my leg again and get back to health, I'm at home, I'm out of money, and so I needed to earn. And so I started a landscaping business, which is what I did in high school. And so I started that business. It really took off, did really well. And it doubled every year for 5 years. And then I sold it. And then I started a construction company right after that. And that business grew. And I sold that business in 2004. I found very early on that I could hustle my way. One of the big lessons I learned very early on was if I could out hustle the next person, I'd get there just 1 hour before you did, and got to that, took out that ad 1 day before you did, and I got there just before you did. I'd win a lot of the business, and that turned out to be true. And so I found out very early on, especially in my first 2 businesses, that I just beat you to the finish line just by a little bit, and that's all I needed to do.
Well, I think this is a fascinating story because when you think about someone who's going to school for accounting and business, that's a very traditional route. And entrepreneurship isn't necessarily that traditional. So here you are, you're studying in school. Now you find that you're successful with the landscape business and you move on to construction. But as you're finding this success, did you have those around you, roommates, parents, friends that were saying, hey, look, just stay with this accounting. You've got a good life ahead of you, a good traditional 9-to-5 life ahead of you?
Well, yeah. Everyone was like, what are you, nuts? Go back to school, get a good job. Most people advised me around security, how to keep me safe. They weren't saying, hey, go for it. That wasn't the case at all. I'm not saying they weren't supportive. They were, but they were all like, hey, what's your fallback plan? What's your how are you going to protect yourself in case this thing goes badly? And that's not really what I wanted to hear. I wanted to hear people get behind it and say, hey, listen, let's see what you can really make of this. And I had a few people who encouraged me, but most people were like more on the other side of the scale. They were saying, you must have lost your mind.
Well, and if you think about risk and you look around us, society is really conditioned to avoid risk, to avoid taking that unsecure or insecure choice. And as you're going about your business and you're not finding these friends that are, they're not not supporting you, but they don't understand. I look at risk and taking on this risk as a real mindset. And so I want to take you back to that time. And what are some of the things that you did or were born with, something conditioned in your mind that said risk today is equal to reward in the future?
Well, I can't say, I think at the time I was just, either dumb enough or naive enough or ideological enough where I didn't think about the risk. When I started my first business, I was 17 years old. And so I just thought I was going out and starting a job. And part of the reason why I thought I could do it was in high school, when I was 16 years old, my boss was sending me out on proposals. Hey, go give this proposal to Mrs. Smith and see how see what she says about it. And here, here's the here are all the talking points. And so I went and met with Mrs. Smith, and I came back and I said, okay, we're a go. And he goes, oh, well, which parts? I said, what do you mean, which parts? All the parts. You put everything on the proposal. She's going to buy it all. He said to me, she what? I said, yeah, you said, this part of the landscaping project and then this piece and that piece. That's what you told me to sell her. So I did. And he goes, well, the things on the bottom were the options. I didn't realize you were going to sell all of it. And I said, well, you told me to sell all of it. So I did. And so, not only did I sell it, but then my boss would say, oh, good news, you get to run it and do all the work. And it wasn't before too long that I realized, wait a minute, I think I could do this without him. He's, I'm basically doing everything, and so I said, I was basically doing it all before. What is it? What's the difference now? And the only difference was I didn't have the truck and I didn't have the tools. So I went and I bought those with what little money I had and, just bootstrapped the business until I got to the point where, I had a little bit of extra cash left over and I could reinvest in the business.
Well, and I love this story as a, self-made kind of the discovery and realization within yourself that you have this talent and this ability. And I think there really is some power in naivete. And that is, not necessarily knowing the negative outcomes that could happen, but it's also not just not knowing them, but also managing the fear of failure, the fear of unsuccess, and the fear of risk. But now, as you look back, are there things that you would have done different now, knowing now what you know now, had you known then?
Yeah, I mean, there are. I mean, one of the things I would have done was I would have leveraged more and I would have used more people. I mean, I'm now in my early 50s and I can feel the pain of overworking in so many areas, physically overworking. The toll, all the manual labor I did for 25 years, I can really feel it, now. And so I would have learned how to delegate more. I think I built teams, but I still I was so much the work, the player coach and the worker. As a matter of fact, my workers nicknamed me Captain Glucose. and so I used to burn out my employees a lot when I was when I had my company, because I would say, well, you guys got to keep up with me. And that was like the benchmark. And they were like, well, no way, we're not going to be able to do that. And after a while, these guys, not that they didn't like doing the work, but they were just like, listen, I can't keep pace with this. And so I would lose these people. And the other thing that I learned I would have done differently was I used to bid all of my work as if not only there was me working there, but 10 of me working there. And then I would realize, wait a minute, we're falling behind. And I realized I was not properly planning for other people to be involved in the work that didn't necessarily either work as fast or didn't know as much about the work that we were doing. Not that I was some, great worker. I was passionate and had a lot of energy and all, but I needed to be just a bit more realistic in how I bid my work for profitability.
And we've talked about this a couple of times so far this episode, where you had this drive where you just got out. If I can get there an hour before somebody else, if I can get my bid or my advertisement up an hour before you, where did you get this drive? I mean, it's clear that a lot of your success is founded on this drive, this passion, this hard work attitude. Where do you think you got that? And how can we, those of us who may not have it, cultivate it within ourselves?
Yeah, I mean, thank you for the compliment. I mean, when I first started, I'd never been in business, and I was a kid. I was just a year out of college. I had done some freelance landscaping work, and part of me just flat out couldn't believe somebody hired me and paid me money to do work that I enjoyed. And I felt such a sense of responsibility that, wow, someone paid me $10,000, $20,000, $50,000. I had never seen that much money in my life. I was, grew up I'm one of 10 kids, and we did not have a lot of money growing up. So the idea that I could have $100,000 at any one time, in the bank, like from deposits and checks and this and that, of operating cap, not that it was even all mine or all went in my pocket, but I remember there was a point where I had deposit checks from jobs and it equaled over $100,000, and I couldn't believe I was holding that much money in my hand. And I was like, holy cow, I don't want to screw this up. And so I felt, grateful on the one hand that people put that sort of trust in me. But, to me, I thought I won the lottery. And I thought, man, I'm on to something here. Let me keep it going. And I started to enjoy more and more the freedom and independence of being in my own business and being able to script my own experience, and so really it was that I kept feeling over and over again that I was doing something a little outside the box. It was working. And if you bear in mind for a second, I was paying my way through college, right? So my 18 months in college were great. I made great relationships, had a blast. But I worked 40-hour weekends. My first semester in college, I didn't have enough money to buy my books. So every penny it took, I get to my first semester at college, and I didn't buy books. I went to a class every day, and they were like, oh, what are you, something's pretty smart. You don't need to crack a book open. I'm like, if I had the $80 to buy them, I'd have bought them. I didn't have any money for books, so I sat there, I took notes, and when the test came, I did my best, and I'd go to the library, try to find the textbook, and if I could find it, I couldn't, And so I was working in the cafeteria, breakfast 3 days a week. I was working at night at a pizzeria, making cheesesteaks and flipping pizzas to pay for the school. I mean, I was working over 40 hours a week. Plus, I didn't have enough cash for books. And then I'm trying to get my way through school, and I did okay. But then, within that span of that 2 years, I was going through all of that. And then I broke my leg, and then now I'm out of school. So it was a tricky time, and it really tested me. So when I was literally back on my feet, bought a little pickup truck and some tools, and I'm actually making money. I actually have some purpose. I actually feel like I'm doing something. I'm actually making a name for myself. I'm actually doing something with my life. All of a sudden I was like, damn, I hadn't felt this way in years. And it felt so good to be in control of where I was headed that it gave me energy, to go out. And every time I won another job, I got more and more confident about it. And I just said, you know what, I'm not, there's some reason somebody is allowing me to have this sort of success. So whatever I'm doing, I'm going to keep going.
Well, and you said something that's very interesting, because you said, you felt like you won the lottery, and you felt like you were very grateful. You had a lot of gratitude for the opportunities that were coming your way. At that time, did you fear that this was your one shot and that you could lose it at any moment? Did you have any fear that this was maybe the pinnacle of success and that there was nothing on the other side? Or did you always feel that you would win the next lottery or have the next opportunity open for you?
Well, it's a good question, because right around that time, about 4 or 5 years into my career, if you will. My career, I'm 21 years old. A friend of mine won the lottery. I was exuberant, happy for them and all. And they said to me, they were looking into personal development and had asked me if I knew anything or knew anywhere to go. Now, bear in mind, this is 1989. And so I did some research and I'm looking around and I said, hey, there's this guy called Tony Robbins and he seems to be doing some neat stuff. And back then, not many people knew who he was. And so they went to this seminar and said, wow, this is really good. I actually enjoyed it. Thanks so much. I'm like, oh, cool. Well, I'm glad, and didn't think much about it. Fast forward a year, I get a call from one of their reps and said, oh, the person that you recommended go to the seminar actually recommended that you give it a shot. So I did. And I really fell in love with it. And I learned a couple. I remember doing this one game they had at the seminar called Simon Says. And he does this Simon Says game. And out of 1,000 people that were there at the seminar, like 20 people become finalists and they go on the stage with them and they try to win this game of Simon Says. And one of the things that struck me was there were two people at the end that couldn't be beat. They were just like, pow, 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 back and forth, just great at the game. And Robbins interviews the two of them. And as it turns out, of all the people in the room, only two people had the goal to actually win. And I found that those were the two people who were actually the two people on the end. And so one of the things I took from that was, out of all these people, and they asked you, what was your goal and did you get your goal? And everybody asked for whatever everybody got what they asked for. One person said, I want to have fun. They had fun. One person said, I want to see how far I can go in the game. And they went pretty far. But only two people in the entire room had the actual goal to win the darn game. And there they were, the two people on the stage fighting it out at the end. And what I took from that is that there's less competition for number one than any other spot that you can go for. And I said, well, you know what? If there's less competition for number one, why don't I shoot for that one? Because I'm certainly putting the effort in. And so what else can I do? And I started looking into all the things that gave me the top credentials or the top associations, top certifications in any field that I'm in. And I realized, you know what? The path to number one is, number one in your niche, number one in your area is actually a pretty clear path if you have the guts to go after it.
I think this is a huge lesson that you just taught us here, this less competition for number one. And I want the listeners to take just a moment and sit back and think about what it means to be number one in your industry, number one in whatever you're seeking in success, in business, in life, in family. And look at this as less competition going for number one. And why is there less competition going for number one? Because most people don't think they can ever get there. Most people give up. Like you're talking about Tony Robbins in this seminar and this Simon Says, you got 9,998 people who didn't have the goal to get to number one because in their mind, they said 10,000 people, no way, it's not going to happen to me. I just want to have fun. I wanted to get far. But when you clearly identify what you want to get out of something and you determine that you want to be the best of the best, why there's less competition up there. That doesn't mean that it's easy. And that doesn't mean that you're going to sail through, skate through and get right to the top. But it does mean there is a clear path. Carl, I love this. I think this is probably one of the most impactful things that we've talked about on the podcast. I've got it starred and circled in my notes right now, and I appreciate you bringing up that story. Now I want to shift gears. I want to talk to you about one of your books. I want to talk to you about your 3 books and what it's like to write a book, but I'm most interested in this most recent one, the Biz Dev Done Right, Business Development Done Right. Let's talk about that, how you got started and what that book's about.
So thank you. So Biz Dev Done Right was a book that I co-authored with a good friend of mine, Karen Kopp, and we were sitting down one day, and I was doing a strategy session with her on her business, and we got to talking about some of the mistakes we see people make when they're doing sales and business development, and we joked and we said sometime during the conversation, we could write a book about this, and be careful what you ask for because sometimes you get it, and sure enough, we decided to sit down, and when we sketched out what a book could look like, we felt good about it, and we went ahead and did it. But basically, it was demystifying the sales process, because so many people overthink what sales is all about, and they overthink what the process is all about. And if you simplify the sales production of your business and the sales management of your business, it's actually pretty straightforward. It's pretty predictable, and you can create a formula for what will help you get your result in your sales.
So give us kind of an example of this, because I do a lot of sales in my business. I think anybody in business, and frankly, anybody that's employed, is in some level of sales. Now, I imagine that you're talking more high-level sales where you're actually face-to-face with a client and the revenue production is on your shoulders. And so how does this play out? Like, how do I take my business and create a production or management cycle or system that makes it predictable for me?
Okay, so there's two things. So the first way to so the first thing is look at your sales cycle, your sales process for a second. And virtually every sales transaction has two major components to it. One component is selling, and the other component is what we would call closing. And usually the front end of any sales process is what we would call selling, meaning building the relationship, qualifying the customer, making sure that they are a good fit for you, you're a good fit for them, they have a need, you have a product that fulfills that need, and you just get along. You get along and you gain agreement and you make a business friend, okay? And that takes a certain personality type and certain area of focus to do that. And so you're not trying to sell them there. You're not trying to make them take any major commitment. You are just making a business friend and getting them all jazzed up about the idea that you could possibly work together or that you might have something of value for them, right? And so being a good seller requires you to be able to be a good relationship builder, very enthusiastic about the brand, very passionate about what you do, and get them to feel the same. Now, the back half of your sales activities is what we would call closing. Closing requires risking the relationship. It requires having the tough conversation about terms and conditions, about the cash. And you have to put the entire relationship at risk because you need to break rapport. Because if you don't close this person, they don't stop shopping. They go directly to your competitor. And so it takes a certain personality type to be a good closer. So think about it for a second, Jake. You walk into an auto dealership. Can a car salesman sell you a car?
Well, they would scare me away if they came on too tight, because I just want to go there and look around, right? I want to get information.
And if you got all that information and you try to buy from them, they're not even authorized to sell you the car. Right? Think about it. When you bought a car, you got all excited. They took you for a test drive. You tested all the knobs, did the new car smell. You filled out the forms. But then they said, oh, before you could buy the car, you need to go talk to the finance manager or office manager or general manager or whomever. And that person had the authority to close the deal. The salesperson didn't even have the authority to sell you the car, even if you had a full price offer.
And this just happened to me a couple of weeks ago. We bought a car, and you're exactly right. We spent 3.5 hours with the salesman. We spent 30 minutes with the finance manager. The next thing I know, I have more car than I could probably afford.
Right, because the salesman, the salesperson said, "Oh, you're so great. You love the color. You love this. Awesome. Let's fill it out. Let's get you in front of that." And let's get you in front of that finance manager. You've had no difficult conversations to that point. They're the ones that sit down with you and say, hey, you know what, Jake, your credit's a little bit less than perfect. And you don't want to walk out of here with this car without all of that extra protection. And so let's get you set up on these things. And you say, well, I'm not so sure I want it. And by the time you're done, they talk you into it, right? And so they're a good closer. And so early on in being a good sales producer, it's important to understand what are the sales activities and what are the closing activities. And so when you understand and you find out which one you were born as, and we are all born as either a seller or a closer. And what makes you a good seller can often get in the way of you being a good closer. And what makes you a good closer can get in the way of you being a good seller. Now, the beauty is you can learn the other skill. And so I was born as a seller, right? And so I remember going out and giving a proposal. And if they said no, I was like, oh, they must not like me. And what did I do wrong? And did I get offended? And then at some point it was like, well, come on, jerky boy. You're not going to win every deal. Get over it. And I'm like, oh, yeah, good point. So I've learned closing and I love it now, but I had to learn it. And some people are born as closers and they have to learn the bedside manner and the rapport skills to be a good seller.
And Carl, I've done a lot of sales training. I've done a lot of gone to conferences and learned, and this is a very clear difference. This is something new. This is unique to me, and I'm definitely interested in picking up biz dev done right because I want to learn about these two sides. But I'm also a huge baseball fan. And in baseball, you have pitchers, and the pitcher can be a starting pitcher, they can be a middle reliever, they can be a closer. And I want to talk about these terms in baseball along with this sales discussion that you're having because, a closer gets paid. I mean, if you've got a closer that could come in the bottom of the ninth and close out that game, they are high paid individuals. But nowadays, we're seeing a lot of success of these individuals that can go the distance, that can come into the game and pitch all 9 innings. And there's awards for being someone that can do all 9 innings. And so I want to talk to you a little bit about how we can be not just a closer and not just a starting pitcher, but how we can go the distance and how we make that transition. Because I, like you, Carl, I'm a seller. I'm very good at relationships. I love to build that relationship of trust, but I need to figure out how to switch that dialogue and that conversation into being a closer and to close that deal when it's not A, something that I'm naturally good at, and B, it is something that I'm required to do. There isn't somebody else. It's just me.
Yeah. And look, in business, you've got to do both. And most of us are reluctant directors of business development of our own business. And let's face it, we would all love to grow our business without having to network and sell and set up lead, campaigns and funnels. We'd all love to have our clients just come running to us, but it's simply not realistic. And so most of us are reluctant, but you can be both. Now, you like baseball. So Jason Verlander is the pitcher you just talked about. He's the guy that could grab the ball, pitch 95 miles an hour for 9 innings straight. And that's why he ended up being the MVP of the playoffs and the World Series because he's that guy. He's a stud.
And his name was on my mind as I was telling that story. That is ironic, but the truth. I was thinking about Verlander because we just got done with the World Series and he was incredible.
Yeah, he just, and not everybody can be that. But luckily in business, if you look at the back of a baseball card for a baseball player, what you'll see is early on in their career, they show some signs of promise, and then their career trajectory goes up, and then it peaks, and then it trails off. And I'm sure for Verlander and others that the same will happen. The beauty in business, though, is early on, you show some promise and your career trajectory goes up. And if you're committed to lifelong learning and you're committed to improvement, you can stay at your peak for an awfully long time because business doesn't matter about how fast you can throw the ball and how many pounds you can squat or how many, stairs you can sprint up. It's not a physical game. It's an energy and it's an emotional and intellectual game. So once you learn the skills, you can actually increase as you go over time. But you do have to commit to a life of learning and improvement. You can't be just repeating your rookie season every year and just be doing it the same old way you always did it. You have to stay on top of what the current trends are, what the what the response of the market is currently, and adapt and pivot as needed.
Yeah, and I love what you're saying because what you're saying is getting good at closing does not diminish your skills as a seller. You keep those skills up and you learn new skills and you've got a lifetime to develop these skills. Carl, I love this conversation. I got to be honest with you. I'm looking at my paper here. I've got so many more questions, but our time is running down. We're probably going to have you come back and answer some questions about growth hacking and critical skills to take your business to the next level. But before I let you go today, I'd love to jump over to my favorite section, learning from leaders, and kind of find out a little bit more of the personal to go along with this business conversation. Are you ready to jump in?
Born ready. Bring it on.
The book currently on your Kindle or bedside table, what are you reading?
I'm reading a book right now called The Machine, which is a segmentation of the sales process and looking at how you can specialize each area of the sales process.
All right, Elite Achievers, did you hear that? Carl, a master of selling, somebody who knows what's going on in the world of selling, continues to dissect the selling process, to learn more, to get better, and to improve his game. I love it, Carl. The next question is best movie ever made.
There's this movie, and then there's every other movie. All right? The Hunt for Red October. Absolutely most brilliant movie ever made.
Now, do you read the books or do you just watch the movies? Have you read the book?
I have not read the book. I watched the movie, and it was just it's everything in one. It's been, my family is tired of watching it with me, and I will make them do it now and again. But it's just a super movie the way they combine so many elements at the same time. Brilliantly done. And
incredible acting. So
yes.
How about your leadership superpower?
My leadership superpower is getting people to think they can do things, that they can't, but by the time they realize they can't do it, they've already done it. So that's my leadership superpower.
And what a great superpower, because once you break down that mental barrier of something somebody doesn't believe that they can do, and then they do it, you have just expanded a horizon to them that is incredible. I mean, the next step, the growth opportunities, I think that's a tremendous leadership superpower. How about a motivational quote, philosophy, or mantra?
So one of my favorite quotes is often credited to Nelson Mandela, but it was written by Marianne Williamson. And it basically goes like this. It says, "Your playing small does not serve the world. Let your light shine, and that will give permission to others to allow their greatness to come through." And that really landed with me when I first read it.
Well, it light bulbs for me too. I love it. But as you heard that, what kind of motivation did it give you? What does it say to you? How does it speak to you?
Well, for me, it was a bit of a wake-up call because I realized I was settling in certain areas of my life and not playing big in my life. But it also did make me take inventory, and I realized that I was actually playing pretty big in a lot of ways, and that there were a lot of people that were looking at me looking at me as a bit of a role model. And I loved the idea that I had a secondary purpose of reasons to work for. So now when I go to work, I feel like I'm doing it not just for me, but on behalf of others who are using me as an example. So that really charges me up. I feel like I have the energy of others, besides me, and I'm like an unstoppable force as a result.
And I'm really grateful that there were those before us, the founding fathers and some of these business leaders that have created the opportunities and the economy and everything that gives us the advantages that we have today. Grateful that they didn't play small, but that they stood above the rest and used their potential to the fullest. So I love that quote, and I love your description of it. The last question then is the best business book ever written.
Best business book ever written. That's a good one. I really enjoyed Rich Dad Poor Dad. That was very eye-opening for me. I would probably, I don't think of it in terms of best like that, but that one's got to be up there for me.
Well, and that one really jumped out to me as well. I think I read it at a time in my life where I needed that. And as I was reading your bio, you co-host the Quit and Get Rich on iHeart Radio. And my first thought when I read the title of that radio broadcast is the Rich Dad, Poor Dad. It's the opportunity to grow and do more. So Carl, before we let you go today, how about you give us a little last bit of advice, and then of course, tell us how we can find out more about your radio show, pick up your books, and learn more about you.
So, if anything, Jake, thanks so much. First off, I really appreciate the opportunity. And if I could be a lesson to anybody, there's two lessons that you can take. One of them is you can hustle your way to the first million, but to be sustainable beyond that, you need to have systems in place, and you need to build a team around you so you can stay at that level and even grow from there. And I've tried to do that not only in every business I've owned, but with every business that I advise. I learned very early on that if you love what you're doing, you not only can sustain what you're doing, but you need to love what you're doing, because you're going to get so much negative feedback that you're going to have to be able to overcome that. And the path to number one is very straightforward and very simple, but it's not easy, and it will be the most energy you expend in your life, bar none. And so you have to love what you're doing so much that all the other ancillary things that you need to do, you're up for. So that's what I've learned over the years. And then lastly, how you find me is I'm on the internet. I'm on the web. I'm pretty easy to find. You can get me at carlgould.com, CarlGould.com.
And we're going to link all that up in the show notes. Carl, I had an incredible time sitting here and learning from you. You are truly a modern leader with a tremendous amount of experience. I love your sales background. I love the relationship generation that you bring to this. Your answers to the questions have been spot on. You've turned the light bulb on for me, and I can't thank you enough for the time that you spent.
Hey, well, thanks so much. Thanks for having me on the show.
All right, my friends, a great, big, huge thank you to Carl Gould for coming on the show. 3-time multimillionaire business creator and a guy who really knows his way around sales. I love that conversation of separating ourselves into two roles, becoming good at both roles and becoming the Verlander in our own business. And that is selling, creating relationships, building that trust, and then taking that relationship, that built trust, to the next level by closing. And that requires risking the relationship. We got to do both. Guys, we can't just be relationship builders. We have to close business if we want to eat, if we want our kids to live indoors. And I do. A couple of other things that jumped out to me. Great conversation with Carl. Look, what takes you to your first million is not going to take you to your next million. Hustle to your first million, but then you got to put in teams. You got to put in processes to take it to the next level. And finally, you got to love what you do. If you're going to sustain growth, if you're going to overcome the obstacles and trials, you got to love what you're doing. Of course, I can't close this episode out without touching on that. There is less competition at number one. Shoot for the stars. Go for the top. Do the best that you can, because there is less competition, because everybody else is afraid to go for number one. They just want to be an also-ran. You want to stand on the podium. Of course, everything that we talked about in this episode and in every episode can be found on the website, jakeacarlson.com. This episode's show notes are found at jakeacarlson.com/ML54. That's for episode 54. And until next week, I want to wish you the best of days and even better life. And of course, stay awesome. See you next week. Thanks for listening to the Modern Leadership Podcast. You can find me on Facebook at Speaker Jake, on Twitter at Jake A. Carlson, and of course the website, jakeacarlson.com. See you there.